One downside of the validation we added thus far is our code, specifically this line. We have this entered name is valid state, and we start with true here, which implies that initially we treat this as valid. And it turns out that that's not really the case. We just set it to true to not show this error state here ahead of time. But actually we're cheating a bit here. We're setting this state to a value that's not correct because we know that we're not going to really need that state for anything else than outputting whether this is valid or not. Now, why could this be a problem? Well, imagine you had some useEffect call in there where you do something whenever entered name is valid changes, and specifically you do something if entered name is valid is true. So if it's true, you want to do something. You want to, in this case, log name input is valid. In a real application, you might want to send an HTTP request here. So let's say we add this, and for this I import useEffect. If I do that and open the developer tools, you see that this gets logged right at the beginning before I did anything. Because of what I just explained, we incorrectly set this state here to true. And it isn't valid at the beginning. That's just not correct. We just did this as a workaround to correctly show the error feedback. Now, if you don't have this useEffect case here, you of course might be good with that, because then you have no real disadvantage of using this trick. But even then, I don't think this code reads nicely. Entered name is valid is true? Really? At the beginning? It might be nitpicking, but I'm not too happy with that. I think it makes more sense to set this to false initially, because the input is invalid initially. Hence, we might want to add a third state here, the entered name touched state maybe, and set entered name touched, where we basically control whether the user already did edit the entered name input field. And this also is false initially, because initially this input field is untouched. The user didn't do anything with it. So now we can use entered name touched in combination with entered name is valid to show this error message and to add this invalid class. Because now we don't just care about whether the input is invalid or not, but we also care about whether the user had a chance of editing it. Because if the user didn't have a chance yet, because the user didn't touch any input yet, then of course there is no reason to present this error. For this, I'll add a new constant here. Name input is invalid. And for this, I'll check if not entered name is valid. So that's the check we also have down there. But I'll combine this with checking if entered name touched is true. Because only if it was touched and it then is invalid, I want to treat it as invalid. And now it's this name input is invalid boolean, which I can use in this condition here and also down here. Though now we have to be careful, since this is now name input is invalid, we of course need to invert our logic here. Here we don't check if it's not invalid, but if it is invalid. Hence I removed the exclamation mark. And here I of course want to set this invalid class if name input is invalid and not set it otherwise, like this. With that, if we go back and we reload, initially this is not showing this error state, but if I click submit, it's also not doing that. And of course it's not doing that because we never changed this touched state. We now need to do that. And it's now up to us how we want to change this. And one change definitely is the form submission. If the form is submitted, all inputs are treated as touched. Even if the user didn't type into them, the user submitted the overall form, which basically means the user confirms the overall form. So we could treat all inputs as touched in this case. So whenever the form is submitted, before checking the validity, just when it's submitted, I'll set entered name touched to true. because all the inputs, and in this case we just have one input, are touched, are confirmed by the user when the form is submitted. With this added, if we now click submit, we get this error state once we submit. And this is now a little bit of a better code. It's more code, arguably, but it's cleaner. And it allows us to handle more use cases. And it also allows us to ensure that code like this here works correctly and doesn't run unexpectedly just because of some strange workaround.